raw transactions you pull from the blockchain, and then you happily go on and do your work, and then you're done. In reality, it's a lot more complex than that. So I'm going to walk through what does it look like to build your crypto data pipeline in 2023, I believe is our current year. All right, there's going to be a lot of memes in the presentation today. Some of them might be too niche to understand. We have a running joke in the crypto data community that you should never use cumulative events because it hides what's actually going on in the space. You'll see a lot of people do like, oh, look at my cumulative volume, you know, and in actuality it's kind of flat. It's supposed to be a meme that your marks say from cumulative charts today, but we actually presented one earlier showing our cumulative queries, so we have committed a sin. Cool, so this is going to be a very lightweight presentation. I think you guys have already played enough with our new products, and so you can kind of sit back, close your laptops if you want, and just listen and enjoy learning. And if anyone has questions along the way, just raise your hand at any time. We're going to be covering a lot of technical concepts, including stuff like labels, ZK, account abstraction, intents, MEV, all that fun stuff. All the stuff that you have maybe been avoiding. So, 3 things for today. The first is, what are the stages of crypto data? It's getting easier to get the raw data, but there's a lot of steps that come after, and anyone who here has looked into spellbook tables before? Raise your hands. Who here thinks they understand all of the spellbook tables? Yeah, that looks about right. It's kind of an expansive world. Number 2, after we get through the stages, we're going to have to redefine what a transaction looks like, right? Right now, transactions are just from, to, and it's a single row on a table, but it's about to get a lot more complicated than that. And lastly, we're going to cover the modern data pipeline. So what does it mean to work with these stages and transaction structures on Dune? So that'll be fun. Cool. Let's get started. So stages of crypto data. It's easier than ever to get basic raw data now, even if the developers don't really care about the data analysts, right? So you might see all the time, at least once a month or so, that some new protocol out there deploys contracts, and you're all excited to go and analyze them, and then you go there and you realize there's no events. And anyone here who's done analytics in the space should know that without events, our job becomes much, much harder to do. And in the past, maybe a year or 2 ago, then we would have to basically struggle through traces and try to put things together ourselves. But thankfully, the data ecosystem, even outside of Dune, has evolved a lot. You have customizable clients. Who here has heard of Aragon or Reef before? Or who here knows what a client is, like an RPC client? Someone? Okay, so we'll start with the basics here. So RPC clients are actually how Dune gets its raw data, right? So every client that runs the Ethereum blockchain stores the data from the blocks, and there's a set of API endpoints called JSON RPCs that you can get block data from. Right? You can get all Ethereum logs from a single RPC, you can get all transactions from a single RPC, traces by transaction hash. And you used to have to work with those standards, and you really had no other choice. But now you have more customizable clients like Reef built by Paradigm. And the idea there is that you can create your own RPCs off of blockchain data so that it's a lot easier to say, like, you have a custom endpoint for Unisoft swap events built directly into the client so that anyone who wants to use it can just download the client and get the data. They don't have to work through these extra steps of figuring out the RPCs and then figuring out the data transformations. On the other side, you also have customizable events, right? So if there are protocols that do not have the events you want, there are now new tools such as Ghostlog. We have Chris somewhere back in the room there that lets you add events that don't exist on the contract. You can add them and basically rerun them as if those events existed. You know, so if you're working with pseudo-swap data or compound data and you hate how they've done their events, you can now go and add it yourself. And this saves a lot of headache, because now you can either customize things at the client level, or you can customize things at the event level, and we don't have to care what the developers do. You also have composable subgraph Who here has heard of the graph before? Yeah, who here has created a subgraph before? It's nice, right? You just create a schema and it automatically indexes. Who here knows what the main pain point of working with these subgraphs are? Any guesses? Yeah, the hosted service does go down. Anyone have any other guesses on what the problems of subgraphs are? Go for it. Yeah, there's a lot of performance errors, but I would argue from a data analyst point of view, one of the biggest issues is that subgraphs aren't composable. If Aave creates a subgraph and Compound has a subgraph, I can't create a subgraph that then combines those two, right? But now you can. There's composable subgraphs, there's companies like Gold Sky, there's other ones like Satsuma, which is acquired by Alchemy. And the idea here is just that everything is becoming more composable. If you just want to get some basic decoded data easily, you can pull it pretty painlessly. And that's nice, to have all of that raw data formatted nicely. But that's not the end of the transformation journey, right? So anyone here who's worked as an analyst has probably gotten some form of this question from their boss. Can you quickly just grab me a chart of our competitor's volume and just go ahead and filter out all the bots? You know, it makes it sound so easy. Like, oh, you have the decoded data. Why can't you just go and easily do this kind of analysis? And that's where we enter into the realm of spellbook, where you have 400, 500 different analysts putting their opinions on the data in different ways. And some people are like, oh, I'm going to label these addresses as bots. And I'm going to label these addresses as MEV traders. And then you kind of get into this, the jungle, the real jungle of this data. Right? So in this first part, I'm just going to talk to you about building a mental framework around what are the stages of data transformation. Right? So anytime you go and analyze a protocol, or if you go to spellbook and you try to figure out like what the heck's going on in there, you should have 5 stages of the data in mind, right? After the raw data is in there. You should have parameters, right? So every single protocol has parameters of some level, right? That might be constants in the form of what are the protocol fees that are paid. That might be understanding the pools and fact trees and knowing what the default deployed pools look like. That might be different protocol states, like what are like Aave risk parameters or whatnot. And that might be upgrades as well. You might have to know, oh, USDC had an upgrade last year that allowed for XYZ new like permit behaviors, right? So first you have to understand the parameters. Then you can get into feeds, right? So who here has used DEX trades or NFT trades before? Cool. So for those who don't know, those tables are feeds that we abstract away all of the complexity of how OpenSea might handle like an auction or order, and you just get like 5 nice rows for 5 different swaps, and it's super easy to analyze across different platforms. Right? So these are feeds, and this is kind of where a lot of spellbook and a lot of transformation tables are today. Moving down the line, this is where we need to get to, and this is where people get into a lot of arguments. Third on the list is we need positions. It needs to be really easy to figure out like user balances of a token, LP like yields for a DEX, what is users like borrow and lending ratio, what are their open orders at any given point in time. And this positions table can be created from these feeds, right? And after you have positions and feeds and parameters, now you can get into labels, right? So you can label 3 things as of today. You can label transaction hashes. So let's say it's a DEX trade. You might want to label as like, this was a sandwich or a front run transaction. That's a label. You want to label the wallets. You might label, these wallets are whale traders versus these wallets are like retail traders. You might also want to label contracts. You might want to say, okay, this is an aggregated contract, and we know that it's doing a bunch of fraud, right? And only then, after you have those 4 stages of data transformation, can you get to metrics, right? And metrics is kind of like the holy grail of what we want to get to. And this is kind of thrown around today just as what is a protocol's TVL, or what is a protocol's volume. But the problem with just throwing around metrics like that is it's not contextual, right? What you actually want to know is, I don't want to just know like number of active traders, I want to know number of active retail traders, right? So I use the retail trader label who hold more than 500 USDC, right? Which would be me looking at a certain position, right? And these metrics only make sense when you can easily apply context to them. Otherwise, all you get on Twitter is a bunch of people arguing about like fake TVL and fake volume, and we really don't get anywhere. So I'm going to pause there for a second, and I'm not really going to pause, but I'm going to pull up Aave V3 so we can get a better set of examples, and then I'll pause for questions on this first section. Who here knows what Aave does? Someone want to try explaining it to me? Ben.
So, I feel like they offer quite a few different things. They offer lending, borrowing, and trading. It's kind of like a one-stop shop for let's say, ERC20.
Yeah, exactly. You have a bunch of ERC20 tokens, and it's kind of this liquidity hub where you can borrow, you can lend, you can flash loan. There's different ways of connecting to vaults. So it's a fairly complex protocol. Right, so let's try and simplify it a little. What are the parameters you want to track? You would want to track which ERC20s are actively being traded, so active A tokens. You would want to know what the supply borrow caps are for these tokens, because as the caps change, the deposit liquidity is going to change. You would want to know the interest rate slopes, as well as the liquidation thresholds for these tokens. Right, so each of these would be tables that you would want to have because they're going to enhance your analytics down the line. Once you have those parameters, now you can move into the feeds, and these are real spellbook tables we have today, like Aave.borrow, Aave.supply, Aave.interest rates, Aave.flash loans. These are like the nice feeds you can start working with to then figure out user positions, right? To know what is there based on borrow and supply feeds, what is each user's LTV per A token, right? And you would get that on maybe a daily basis. Now that you have positions, then you get labels, right? So you would want to label these users as potentially active depositors, so users who are depositing and then lending or taking out maybe multiple times a week, versus inactive depositors, someone who puts in like 3,000 USDC and then just keeps it there for months, even as prices move up and down. And so you might be asking, okay, what's the point of all of that? Well, now you can get into metrics, right? So a metric here that we could put together is we want to know the stability of deposits. Right? So if there's like the curve situation where there's maybe a couple 100 million of deposits, how much of that is a flight risk? And you can only know what the flight risk is if you know like the labels of who's an active depositor, who's an inactive one, what are the LTV ratios of those users in those deposits, and also knowing what the liquidation thresholds are for these specific tokens. Right? So hopefully this kind of helps you build this idea of like, okay, it doesn't make sense for me to just go and figure out a metric immediately. I need to kind of build this up along the way. Does that make sense to people? Is anyone completely lost? No? I see some half smiles. I definitely lost some people. But we're going to move on. Can anyone give me a time check? 2:30. How long do I have? 20 minutes? No one has 20 minutes? Okay. All right, so if that wasn't confusing enough, I'm going to walk into the actual confusing stuff now. Who here has heard of the modular stack? Who can name one thing from the modular stack? Go for it. Celestia, exactly. Everyone's probably heard of Celestia at some point or another and heard of this word data availability. And then probably scrolled along hoping that it's just some alt L1 that's not going to be relevant because it's just like a VC-backed chain or something. Well, I'm here to tell you that the modular stack is here to stay, and we have to think about how it is going to affect how we think about transactions. So I know it looks confusing. We're going to walk through it. So transactions are becoming more and more unstructured, right? Transactions used to be this object where you know there's an EOA wallet sending from calling some contract to, that's exactly the protocol, and everything that matters to the user happens in that one transaction. And every transaction is one user per transaction. And all the execution is just the smart contract logic on chain. I can read the swap function in Unisoft and know that that's exactly what happens. But with the modular stack, we're going to be moving away from that. And everything is going to get more confusing. So that's the defined into undefined, and now we collectively have the work of redefining things. So I'm just going to move this along. All right, smart contract accounts are finally actually here. Anyone who's been in the space for a while has probably heard of Argent or Dharma or Gnosis Safe and understands the idea that you can have a contract that you control with an EOA address, and that contract manages like all of the actual wallet interactions. If you haven't read about Gnosis Safe, then this might not make sense. Go read about it later. But we have two new standards that have come up that really change things. Right? So one is ERC4337. This is account abstraction. It seems overly engineered, and I'm going to talk about why it's important. So EOA wallets today, there's only one way of verifying transactions, is you have to sign it with your private key. There's only one way to pay for transactions, which is I have to pay for it myself. And there's only one way to execute them, and that's that they execute immediately. I sign it, it goes into the mempool, and then it gets executed, right? So those are the three things that devs really wanted to abstract. They want a way for anyone to be for you to have multiple ways of verifying a transaction. They want a way for like a platform to sponsor your fees for you, and they want a way to basically store your intent that you want to do something and execute it at a later point, or have more control over it, right? So this is here. This is here today. This is already being adopted. We've seen more than 500,000 smart accounts in the last month, even. And there's more and more standards being built on top, like 6551, that allow you to transfer these smart accounts. And one real-world example of why this works is Gnosis did a partnership with Visa earlier this year. And the idea is that you have a debit card, right? And with this debit card, you control a smart account. So let's say I go to Jackie's cookie shop and I want to pay with my smart account. I take my Visa card and I tap it, and essentially it goes to the Visa server, and if I've been KYC, Visa will attach a signature on top of my signature to make a transaction with that smart account, right? And I can fill that smart account from my main wallet whenever I want. But the idea here is that I have this account that me and Visa partially control. They can't make any actions on my behalf. I can still send and receive from it on chain if I want, but if I want to specifically pay Jackie as a Visa merchant, I need the Visa composable signature on top, right? So there's a lot of applications like this that you can imagine, both for the real world and also for stuff like gaming, where all of these new protocols that want a special way of verifying a transaction, on top of these other things, they're going to want to use smart accounts. And I think it's unavoidable. If you're not comfortable with the idea that every user has dozens of accounts, feel free to debate with me after. All right, keeping the train moving here, we're going to move into the other big buzzword of the year, intents. Who here has seen intents on their Twitter feed at least once this year? Who here understands intents, besides Ben? Does anyone want to try to explain intents to me? Or what do they think intents mean? A lot of people, when they see intents, they think immediately of MEV. They think of MEV, because most of the tweets that you see about intents are probably from Flashbots people. So it's kind of run into a branding issue where I think a lot of people ignore it because they think, this sits in the MEV world, I don't really need to care about this, I only care about what happens on chain. And that's simply not true anymore. You have protocols like CowSwap, for example, where you sign an intent to make a trade in this off-chain, let's call it an order or auction book. And there's solvers, there's people who take your intent and then figure out the best way to price whatever you want to do. And then those all get bundled and sent in one transaction on chain. So you might have 60 people sending orders, and it all appears in just one transaction sent by the bundle, right? So you end up in this world where the intents that you see on chain, like that transaction, is just the final state of things. You don't really see what price they initially wanted or when they sent it in, or if there's anything in the middle to just cancel out. And this does not just get limited to like DEX trading. right, you could use this for something like art blocks as well, right? So art blocks is an NFT platform that allows you to go and auction like NFTs. So you can imagine that art blocks has a score for all minters that's like, hey, how much are you a diamond holder, right? Do you just mint these NFTs and then dump them? Or do you mint them and actually hold on to them? If you mint them and hold on to them, they'll give you a higher collector score per se, right? So you submit your intents to the system that Artblocks kind of collects intents from, and kind of think of it as a mint pool. And Artblocks will handle the ordering basically for you, saying, okay, it's not just if you pay more gas or get mint. It's if you have a good collector score, you'll be able to mint, right? So it's a two-way street where both protocols can exhibit preferences and users can also exhibit preferences. And it gets really complex. And all I would take away from this is that more logic is starting to happen off-chain. Right? You can't just trust what you see in transactions, both because these intents get bundled, and also because you have smart accounts and relayers and bundlers, so from and to don't really mean exactly what they used to. All right, let's move on to the really fun stuff that I'm excited about. That's even more out there. ZK technology. ZK, zero knowledge, is not just here for rollups. If you hear zero knowledge and you just think, this is this technology that's going to help with settlement of some new rollup, some new chain, and it doesn't actually affect anything else on chain, that's wrong. You actually have this whole new ecosystem called ZK co-processing. And the idea here is that I can take any compute, right? For example, I might be able to, for example, do some machine learning on DeFi protocols, right? I might say, okay, I know the volatility of different urn vaults off-chain. I'm able to calculate that, and I want to use that to set the risk thresholds on my Aave V3 vault, right? So on-chain, all you get is this proof with a certain value, I don't know, 77% is just what the proof came with, and that is now what's going to go and drive this risk parameter of Aave on-chain. It's no longer going to be just hard-coded contract logic of yeah, there's the simple interest rate formula based off of utilization. And so ZK proofs start to play a bigger role in protocols. And you might ask, okay, who's running these computations? This gets into kind of autonomous service systems. If you've heard of Eigenlayer, Eigenlayer is a protocol that basically helps you secure prover systems like this one. So the Artblocks example I mentioned earlier, where they want to collect intents and rank them in an ordering based off a collector score, they would collect the intents based off of smart accounts, and then they would order them and score them basically using these solvers in Eigenlayer, and then submit that on chain with the ZK proof. And I know that sounds all really out there, but I promise you this stuff is basically going live in the next few months. This is not just a theoretical, this is coming, it's just academics. It's here. It's time to really think about what these implications are for understanding on-chain data and just things that we have to abstract. Because remember, the goal here is we're trying to move data through those 5 stages, but the data is getting more confusing. I'm going to leave you with one last confusing bit, is ZK aggregation. So these proofs are not just useful for changing how we think about protocol parameters and protocol logic. It actually affects how we even think about balances, for example, right? So there are a few examples here. One is Nocturne, and the idea here is that you might have many wallets and you want to make a swap privately in a DEX, right? So I could create a ZK proof of my balances and say, okay, across my wallets I own 10,000 USDC. And I can swap it through this DEX, and I get a proof on the other side that says, okay, that's been swapped to 60 ETH or something. And if you look at that structure, you might think it's familiar because that's kind of how UTXOs work on Bitcoin, right? So you're essentially starting to trade UTXOs of proofs. And again, this is basically already live. Thankfully, it's not fully adopted yet, but it's here. You also have this aggregation for identity. So who here knows Unisoft V4 has hooks? Maybe, yes, no. So Unisoft V4, their DEX protocol, they're allowing you to execute logic before and after the swap. basically checking certain ththings are happening so that the swap goes through. So you can have a pool that checks that you have like your World Coin identity proved, you have your Gitcoin attestation proved, and like maybe you're also like a VIP member of like some club. You can have these proofs aggregated, submitted to Unisoft V4 with a hook to allow you to trade a certain token. And again, this is live. It was tweeted today. You can go search up Nebra and Brevis. It exists. It's going to go live with Unisoft V4. Right? So this is kind of the world we're entering in terms of data. It's a lot more complex than it was the last 2 years. And if you're stressed, because I would be, take a breath. It's going to be okay. I don't see people breathing, so hopefully you're not too stressed. The good thing is, we are here to do it together. You will not be doing this yourself. I'm kind of putting this all in a deck here to kind of do a call to action of like, we have to learn this stuff and build it together. And it's going to take a lot of work. But Dune is here, and we're here to support the community with data sets, the tools, the education, everything you need to kind of standardize and abstract this data. How much time do I have? 5 minutes. Okay, all right, I'm going to move on without questions then. If you have questions on this stuff, find me after. I'm very happy to chat about this. How do you actually use Dune for this, right? So Dune gives you the flexibility to build your data pipeline with the community. You can see here the blue parts, that's the stuff in public. The orange parts, that's the stuff in private. You might have data you've uploaded, data someone else has uploaded. You have your own queries you want to control, and then you have ways of leveraging it out with alerts, webhooks, API, whatnot. So let's look at an example of what a modern Dune query looks like. So this is a query where I'm looking at what are the trending contracts being called by a set of tracked wallets. Right? Let's say I want to know what all ENS users are calling this week. This is part of templates, which is something new we're launching next week. I did not get it done in time for this week. And so I can click here, and I can see, okay, I want to look at users using Ethereum that have an ENS, that have a user platform, and I can check, are they users of some other contract, right? So I can check, for example, are they users of Friendtech? And then I want to track, okay, what are Friendtech users doing on Ethereum, essentially. And for the Dune wizards out here, yes, this is the results from another query. We do have or result query params now for those interested. And this is a template you can find just on Dune starting next week. But for this query, there's many parts attached. So, let me close this. There's parameterized labels, which is just using the results from another query. We use materialized views. So if you saw earlier that there were some statistics on like how much each contract has been used. So I have another query that I run on a schedule that saves every single contract address, how many calls it's had, who deployed it, how many users it's had. And I store that as a materialized view, which is essentially kind of like a mini spellbook. And I get to use this in this query so that it runs much, much faster. Because that query takes 20 minutes to run. So I'm basically setting up a mini data pipeline here. I do some other joins as well, and you can also upload a data set of wallet addresses you want to track and join it here as well. So the query has actually become a lot more powerful than ever than the last, even like a few months ago. You can build your pipelines basically inside the query. You're no longer just querying DEX trades or just making some simple analysis. It really becomes a really powerful tool where you have the control and it exists in the context of like basically the crypto platform and crypto community in general. And there's a slide here that kind of breaks it down into steps if you want to read into it more. The deck will be shared later. If you want to dig into it more, I don't think I have time here. But the last thing is go have fun. This is a lot. There's a lot of work to do, and there's a lot of power we're giving you. Please use our documentation. There's a lot of people who just ask into Telegram and Discord, and while we try our best to answer the questions, the best place for you to learn how to use Dune is dune.com/docs. So please try and use that. There's an AI chatbot in there that can help answer your questions, and hopefully I have time to pull it up. It's going to load. Well, there should be this one. You can go and ask the AI here how to do different things on Dune as well. And yeah, with that, that's a very quick overview of building your crypto data pipeline. Do we have time for questions? I have 2 minutes. Does anyone have questions?
Yes, I have a question regarding like that data pipeline. I didn't see anything regarding like unit tests or like data quality checks and like data reconciliation. Just want to get your thoughts on that and maybe some potential blind spots.
Yeah, that's a good question. So we have tests within Spellbook. If you're running your own queries and you want data quality checks, I would say we're on the first step of giving you the tools to build these pipelines. The next step is going to be having good tests around it. Like you might want to set an alert for if a value has crossed a certain threshold. You might want to turn each query into like a repository where you can make PRs and compare like your new saved version with your old saved version, and basically it becomes like GitHub Actions of sorts. It's definitely stuff we're thinking about. If you find yourself running into those issues, let us know so we can prioritize it. But right now, it's kind of, we're putting the tools out there, seeing what the community builds with it, seeing how far you take things. And if things break, we'll help you. Go for it.
Yeah, thank you. Very interesting. And the question is, you spoke about CK analysis and stuff like that.
Yep.
So I guess you understand that it requires a lot of different chains to connect to the Dune because
Yep.
if we have two kind of unit layers, so do you have some pipeline of new chains that will be available in Dune soon?
Yeah, so, I mean, I don't know how much I can talk about it, but there's certain role as a service providers like Conduit, right, which allow you to deploy OP-Stack chains however you want. It's basically AWS for deploying OP-Stack. You can think of it as we would love to integrate with these role as a service providers so that when they go and deploy their new chain, they can just integrate with Dune directly. I think as we enter a multi-chain world, that's kind of where the stack will go. There's no way we just one-off integrate and talk to all of these teams. But as far as I've seen, that wave is not here yet. When it's here, we'll be ready.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, big round of applause for Andrew. Okay, so this fourth presentation wraps it up for the getting the most out of Dune sessions that we've had today. But now we're going to start with some very insightful presentations. First off, we're going to be receiving Angela Liu from Flashbots. She's going to be shining a light on the Ethereum's underflow landscape. So, big welcome to Angela. She's